Hi, Joe O'Connell, Sandpiper Pump. Today we're going to show you how to put an airing kit into our S1F non-metallic. Sitting on the bench I have an S1F non-metallic center ported, an S1F non-metallic inline ported. We're going to show you how to put the kit into the S1F center ported. Sitting out front here I have examples of Sandpiper genuine parts, wet end kit, airing kit. The rebuild you're going to see is accurate in man, method, and machine, but for video purposes some parts of the work performed have been condensed in time. At any point during the presentation, please pause this video until you've completed any phase of the process. The pump we are using in this presentation has been built new and is considerably easier to work with than a pump that has been used in a process. Additional time may be required in the preparation and separation of parts and components during the rebuild. Identifying which kit is required for your repair has become easier on newer pumps with the permanently affixed metal serial number tag that now indicates the wet end and airing kit information for the pump. Kit information can also be found in the service and operating manual. Sandpiper genuine replacement parts, wet end and airing kits provide a bill of material of the components included in the kit. All items included in the kits are components that Sandpiper recommends replacing when rebuilding a pump. The pump we are using today is an example of the ease of kit installation. Always consult your respective service and operating manual before performing any maintenance on your pump. Service and operating manuals include composite repair parts drawings, repair parts list, and torque specifications. For service and operating manuals or more information, visit us on the web at www.sandpiperpump.com. Always remember that safety is the highest priority. When working on or around any equipment, always follow the correct safety procedures. Always read and follow the safety warnings and instructions in the service manual before any work is started on the pump. For more information, see the Warren-Rupp video on safety at sandpiperpump.com. During our airside rebuild today, from our airing kit we're going to install sleeve and spool, pilot valve, gaskets, and O-rings. These are the recommended tools used with the rebuild. While the sizes may change based on the model, the type will remain the same. Torque wrench, ratchet, O-ring pick, small slotted screwdriver, snap ring pliers, sockets and or wrenches, 1/2 inch, 9/16 inch, 3/4 inch, 1 3/8 inch 6-point socket, 3/16 inch socket head Allen wrench, 5/16 inch socket head Allen wrench. Let's get started. For ease of assembly and disassembly, we're going to use a 3/8 inch impact gun. We're going to go ahead and start by taking off the manifold. Got a couple of bolts here, so once you've removed all the bolts from the discharge manifold, set that aside. And take the sealing rings from the check ball retainers out. Take the check ball retainers out. Do that on both sides. After some use, the retainer may stick inside the chamber. May need a pair of pliers to remove the check ball retainer assembly. Reach in and pull the inner seals out. Flip the pump over and then remove the suction manifold. Once you have all the bolts loosened, set the suction manifold aside. Remove the seals, the check ball retainers, and the inner seals. Now we're going to go ahead and take one of the outer chambers off. Get the chamber off, set the chamber aside. Now we'll remove the diaphragm assembly. You're going to want to use a 6-point socket here. Outer plate is plastic. Anything but a 6-point socket may damage that plate. As you remove the diaphragm assembly, you may get the diaphragm rod out with the assembly. This is okay. Set that assembly aside and take off the opposite diaphragm chamber. Set it aside and remove the diaphragm assembly. In this case, the rod came out with the diaphragm assembly. Now we want to take out the 4 socket head cap screws that are holding the inner chamber in place. Take the inner chamber off, remove the gasket and discard. Set the inner chamber aside and complete the same process on the opposite side. Let's take the air inlet cap off. Take the 4 cap screws out. Move the air inlet cap, discard the gasket. You can then access the pilot valve. You may want to pull the actuator plungers all the way out so that the pilot valve comes out easier. And then you can push out the actuator plungers. Actuator plungers can be thrown away. We'll take the main air valve off next. Move the main air valve and discard the gasket underneath. Set the intermediate aside and we'll go ahead and disassemble the main air valve. Need a pair of snap ring pliers to get a hold of the snap ring. Remove the snap ring and retain it for reinstallation. Do this on both sides. Pull the end cap out. Then you can pull the bumper out on either side. And push the spool out. Take a deep well socket and set it down on the table. Make sure the socket is big enough to fit into the bore, but small enough to still be able to push the sleeve out. Next, we're going to remove actuator plunger bushing. First, we have to take out the star ring retainer. Need a small screwdriver, small pair of pliers. Do this on both sides. Now we're going to remove the bushing. You may need some type of wedge to remove the bushing with. In this case, we're using a set of needle nose pliers to wedge into the port of the bushing. Take both bushings out. Below the bushing is a small O-ring. You'll want to remove the small O-ring and discard. Open up our airing kit and set our components out. We'll remove the U-cup seals from both sides of the intermediate. Discard the U-cups. We'll inspect the intermediate. Any sharp edges can be cleaned up with emery paper, crocus cloth, or fine sandpaper. Repair or replace as needed. Want to apply a little grease to our new U-cup seal. The solid face of the U-cup fits into the intermediate. Open face is out. Do it on both sides. Now we'll take our small O-rings for our actuator plungers, put them into the O-ring receiver cup, install the new bushing and the star ring. The star ring is concave, The cup of the star ring faces up. Push the star ring in. There's a lip. Make sure that each finger on the star ring is below the lip. And repeat the process on the opposite side. Take the small O-ring. Make sure it fits into the receiver groove in the intermediate. Install your bushing. There's no top to the bushing. You can go in either way. Push it down in. Then our concave star ring. Star ring is concave. The cup portion of the star ring goes upward. Push the star ring in. Make sure that all the fingers on the star ring are seated below the lip. Take our new sleeve and spool, remove the spool, slide our O-rings on. Make sure that you get the O-rings down into each O-ring groove. And apply a light coat of grease. Grease is applied to keep the items from catching, binding, or cutting while assembling components. Inspect our main air valve body. You want to inspect the bore and the faces. Make sure there's no sharp edges inside the bore. Put a little grease into the body. It will self-align, but you need to get it close. Once you got it close, put the bumper in. There's two sides to the bumper. The cut side with the X in it needs to face the sleeve. Take our end cap, remove the old end cap O-rings, and install new O-rings. Apply a light amount of grease and press into the body. And take our snap ring, has a concave side and a flat side. The flat face of the snap ring faces up. Concave side goes against the end cap. You want to push it down and make sure it seats into the snap ring groove. Take your spool, insert it into the sleeve, twist and wiggle it. Don't force it into the sleeve, it will fit. Again, take your next bumper. Has an X on one side and a protrusion on the other side. The X faces the sleeve. Take our end cap, remove the old O-ring and install the new O-ring. Apply a little grease, push the end cap down into the body. Take our snap ring, has a concave side and a flat side. Concave side goes against the end cap, flat side goes up. Make sure that you get the snap ring all the way down into the receiver groove. If there's space between, you may want to push down on the body to center the spool. Check both snap rings to make sure they're set properly into the snap ring groove. Now we're going to go ahead and put our main air valve assembly onto the intermediate. This is a one-way gasket. Make sure you line up the piloting holes with the piloting ports in the intermediate. Only fits one way. And then you want to line up the pilot holes in the main air valve with the pilot holes in the gasket. And insert your bolts and tighten them down in a cross pattern. And torque to manufacturer's recommendations found in your service and operating manual. Now we're going to install the actuator plungers. Apply a light amount of grease to each actuator plunger and install them into the pilot valve port in the intermediate. There's one on each side. Push the actuator plungers out of the way. So we'll go ahead and install the pilot valve now. You have a couple of gaskets. One gasket fits over the pilot valve. Pilot valve spools come pre-lubed, but you may want to pull it out, check it, make sure there's a little bit of grease on there. Take our gasket, put it on the face of the pilot valve over the stem. Install your pilot valve into the pilot valve receiver in the intermediate. Put the air inlet cap gasket on next in the air inlet. There is no top or bottom to the gasket. The air inlet cap is marked with inlet. Inlet needs to face the nameplate. Tighten bolts evenly in a crossing pattern and torque to the recommendations called out in the service and operating manual. Take our intermediate gasket, make sure you line it up. It's got to line up with the pilot valve actuator plunger and the port that allows the air to go into the inner chamber. Inspect the inner chamber for casting integrity and inspect the machine faces and radiuses for damage or material buildup. Again, the pilot hole and the port need to line up with the pilot hole and the port in the intermediate in the gasket. Thread your 4 socket head cap screws in and tighten these bolts into place. Flip the unit over and go ahead and do the same thing on the opposite side, making sure you line the gasket up with the pilot air port. Inspect the inner chamber. Again, the pilot hole and the port need to line up with the pilot hole and the port in the intermediate in the gasket. Thread your 4 socket head cap screws in and tighten these bolts into place. Now that we have the inner chambers on, we need to torque the cap screws to the recommendations called out in the service and operating manual. And then install the assembly with the rod into the intermediate. You have to make sure you get proper hole alignment. It is unbalanced. There's 4 holes on each side of the diaphragm. You need to make sure you line those 4 holes up on each side of the diaphragm with the 4 holes in the intermediate. You have a center point on the intermediate and arrows on the diaphragm. Install the rod with the assembly on and line the bolt holes up to the proper bolt hole alignment. Take one of our outer chambers. Inspect the outer chamber for casting integrity. Inspect the machine faces and radius of the chamber for damage or material buildup. Scarring, scratches, or material buildup can be cleaned up by using emery paper, crocus cloth, or fine sandpaper. One thing about the chamber, it does have a bead on it. You need to make sure that bead is maintained. Replace the chamber if necessary. There is no top or bottom to the chamber. Orientation can be either way as long as the orientation is lined up with the nameplate and the bolt holes. Put your bolts in, tighten them down in a crossing pattern. Now we're going to install the opposite diaphragm. Make sure you put the bumper onto the diaphragm rod. Thread the assembly on the rod and tighten to manufacturer's recommended torque. If the hole alignment is not achieved at torque, always continue to tighten to achieve hole alignment, never loosen. With the S1F, you may not be able to achieve hole alignment. In this case, remove the diaphragm assembly and loosen the inner and outer plate. Rotate the diaphragm and retighten the assembly. I want to go ahead and install the outer chamber. Inspect the faces, the machine surfaces, the radiuses. The outer chamber has no suction or discharge side. Just need to make sure that you align it with the proper bolt hole alignment in the diaphragm and inner chamber. Get the bolts in and then torque in a crossing pattern to the specifications called out in the service manual. I want to make sure we put the unit upside down first. The nameplate on the intermediate would be up, so make sure you flip the unit over so you cannot see the nameplate. Install the two seals. These seals have two sides, a V-shaped side and a flat side. The V-shaped side will always face the check valve retainer assembly. Take our check ball retainer, inspect that. We have the retainer, the sleeve, and the seat. Install your check ball. With the pump upside down, the retainer side goes in first, so you'll be able to see the seat side. Do this on both sides. Install your new seals. The V-groove of the seal goes up against the check ball retainer assembly. Place your manifold assembly on. Orientation of the manifold is based on process requirements and may be reinstalled in either direction. Tighten bolts evenly in a crossing pattern and torque to the recommendations called out in the service and operating manual. There will be a gap left between the elbow flange and the chamber flange. This is okay. The flange seals against the seal. Do not try to compress the gap out of the flange faces. Flip the unit over. Install your inner seals, and again, These seals have two sides. The V-shaped side will always face the check valve retainer assembly. And in this position, you're going to take your check ball retainer assembly. With the pump upright, you'll need to take the check ball retainer assembly and install the seat side first. Install your seals and replace your manifold assembly. Orientation of the manifold is based on process requirements and may be reinstalled in either direction. Tighten the manifold assembly down to recommended torque. There will be a gap between the elbow flange and the chamber flange. This gap is okay. That completes our airside rebuild of our S1F non-metallic. If you're doing a complete rebuild, also see our video on the wet side. Or for additional information, find us on the web at sandpiperpump.com or contact after sales support at service.warrenrupp@idexcorp.com. Thanks.